Welcome to an epic journey into one of the most dramatic and pivotal events in world history, the fall of the Aztec Empire. In this video, we'll uncover the gripping story of how Hernán Cortés and a small band of Spanish conquistadors, against all odds, brought down the mighty Aztec civilization. This isn't just a tale of conquest. It's a saga of bravery and betrayal, ambition and religion, gold and gods. You'll meet fierce warriors, cunning leaders, visionary kings, and foreign invaders. You'll explore majestic Tenochtitlan, witness bloody battles, and feel the heartbreak of a proud civilization brought to its knees. As we travel back to the early Xulok century, we'll unravel a clash of cultures so monumental that it reshaped the world forever. Through immersive chapters, detailed character portrayals, and vivid storytelling, you'll experience every key moment leading up to the final collapse of the Aztec Empire. Whether you're a history enthusiast or just curious about the past, this story promises excitement, depth, and powerful insight. So grab your seat, open your mind, and let's dive into the rise and fall of gods and empires. This is history as you've never seen it before. In the Valley of Mexico, the Aztec Empire flourished under the rule of Emperor Moctezuma II. Tenochtitlan, the crown jewel of the empire, shimmered like a mirage in the heart of Lake Texcoco. Yet, despite its grandeur, there was unease among the priests and nobles. Strange omens had been recorded. Fiery comets streaking the sky, temples struck by lightning, and even weeping women roaming the streets whispering of doom. Moctezuma, a deeply spiritual man, turned to his priests for guidance. They reminded him of the ancient prophecies, tales that spoke of a bearded god, Quetzalcoatl, who would return from the east. The timing aligned suspiciously well with the strange sightings, and fear crept into the hearts of the rulers. While the empire prospered, there was unrest among subject peoples. The Aztecs demanded tribute, often with cruelty. The conquered resented their overlords, and rebellions smoldered like hidden embers. Meanwhile, far away in the Caribbean, Spanish ambitions stirred. Hernán Cortés, driven by tales of gold and glory, prepared to sail west from Cuba. The destinies of two worlds, one ancient, one eager for conquest, were about to collide, and with them, the fate of an empire would be rewritten. In February 1898, Hernán Cortés set sail from Cuba with 11 ships, over Wubec men, horses, and cannons, tools of a new world order. The Spanish landed on the Yucatan Peninsula, where they encountered the Maya. Through battles and negotiations, they gained interpreters. First, Geronimo de Aguilar, a Spaniard who had lived among the Maya, and then Malinche, a Nahua woman who would become vital to Cortés' plans. As they moved along the coast, the Spaniards established the town of Veracruz, securing their foothold. Cortés, defying the Cuban governor's orders, burned his ships to prevent retreat. There was no turning back, only conquest or death. Meanwhile, word of these pale-skinned strangers reached Moctezuma. Reports spoke of men in shining armor, beasts never seen before, horses, and thunderous weapons. The emperor, increasingly anxious, sent emissaries bearing gifts, precious gold, ornate masks, and feathered garments to appease or perhaps delay the invaders. The gifts only stoked Cortés's desire. Gold, he said, was the Spaniards' heaven, and with Malintzin by his side, translating languages and intentions, Cortés began weaving a web of alliances and manipulation. Two worlds had finally touched, one out of curiosity, the other out of conquest. Cortés knew that to defeat an empire, he needed allies. The Totonacs, one of the many peoples subjugated by the Aztecs, welcomed the Spaniards as potential liberators. Cortés used diplomacy, backed by the threat of Spanish weaponry, to secure their support. Marching inland, the Spanish encountered the fierce Tlaxcalans. Initially, the Tlaxcalans resisted with valor, engaging the Spaniards in brutal skirmishes, but the Spanish firepower and discipline won the day. Instead of annihilation, Cortés offered alliance. He would help Tlaxcala defeat their hated Aztec foes. The Tlaxcalan leaders, including Xicotencatl the Elder, reluctantly agreed. They saw in Cortés not just a powerful force, but a chance to end centuries of Aztec domination. Together, Spaniards and Tlaxcalans formed a formidable coalition. Moctezuma watched these developments with dread. He believed Cortés might indeed be divine, a returning god. In fear or strategy, he allowed them to advance. Now, with thousands of native warriors marching alongside them, Cortés's army swelled in size and confidence. The march to the heart of the empire had truly begun. On November 1519, Hernán Cortés and his multinational army arrived at the gates of Tenochtitlan. Moctezuma, after much internal debate, chose to meet them in peace. The emperor emerged with royal dignity, adorned in shimmering feathers and jewels. Before the city's causeway, Moctezuma welcomed Cortés, offering gifts and hospitality. Cortés was stunned by Tenochtitlan's beauty. Canals crisscrossed like Venetian streets, towering temples pierced the sky, and marketplaces teemed with life. It was a city of wonder and precision, unmatched by anything in Europe. Despite the warm reception, Cortés saw an opportunity. He quickly grasped the empire's centralized power and realized that Moctezuma's capture could mean domination. Within days, under the pretense of safety, Cortés took Moctezuma hostage in his own palace. Moctezuma continued to rule, but now as a puppet under Spanish control. The emperor tried to keep peace, hoping to avoid bloodshed. But resentment grew in the streets. The Spanish were inside the sacred city, and the clock was ticking. With Moctezuma under house arrest, the Spaniards tightened their grip on Tenochtitlan. At first, the Aztec nobility complied, hoping this uneasy peace would avoid catastrophe. But the mood turned bitter. Cortés dispatched expeditions for more gold and control, and demanded tributes from the Aztecs. Tensions reached a boiling point when Pedro de Alvarado, left in command during Cortés's absence, committed a massacre during a sacred festival, the Feast of Toxcatl. Hundreds of unarmed Aztec nobles and priests were slaughtered in the great temple courtyard. The city exploded in fury. The people who once tolerated the Spaniards now rose against them. Cortés returned to chaos. Moctezuma attempted to calm his people, but they no longer trusted him. Stones and arrows rained from rooftops as the streets turned into battlegrounds. The illusion of peace shattered. The rebellion had begun. The rebellion surged through the streets of Tenochtitlan. Moctezuma, once regarded as a living god, was now seen as a traitor, a puppet of foreign invaders. When Cortés returned to the city and attempted to quell the unrest, he ordered Moctezuma to speak to his people from a palace balcony, hoping the emperor's voice would pacify the crowd. Instead, the response was a barrage of stones and spears. Moctezuma was struck and fatally wounded. Whether he died from the attack or was killed by the Spanish remains a mystery, but his death marked the collapse of the fragile peace. Without their emperor, the Aztecs fought with renewed fury. Cortés now faced a deadly trap. The Spaniards were surrounded by thousands of enraged warriors in a hostile city. Supplies ran low, and escape seemed impossible. But Cortés was determined. He planned a stealthy retreat under the cover of night, But the gods were not with them yet. On the rainy night of June's censors, Itzen Wubaik Arsers, Cortés and his men attempted their escape from Tenochtitlan. Under the cloak of darkness, they loaded as much gold as they could carry and led their forces, Spanish and native allies, across the narrow causeways out of the city. But fate was not kind. Aztec warriors noticed the movement and launched a fierce ambush from canoes and rooftops. Chaos erupted on the causeways. Slippery planks broke under heavy loads of stolen treasure. Men and horses fell into the lake and drowned, weighed down by greed. Cortés wept beneath a tree after reaching the mainland, his army decimated, allies lost, and his ambitions crushed. This moment became known as La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows. But this was not the end. It was only the beginning of vengeance. The battered survivors of La Noche Triste retreated to Tlaxcala, where they were received with wary compassion. Though the Tlaxcalans had lost many warriors, they saw the Aztecs' losses as an opportunity to strike back. Cortés, resilient as ever, regrouped. He sent messages across the region, rallying more enemies of the Aztecs, Kempoalans, Quexotzincas, and others. These native groups had endured generations of Aztec oppression. Now, with Spanish weapons and leadership, they saw a chance for liberation and revenge. Cortés built alliances and new strategies. He had ships disassembled and carried over mountains to rebuild later. He trained his army and healed his wounded. Meanwhile, the Aztecs struggled to unify under a new ruler, Cuitlahuac, Moctezuma's brother. But the greatest enemy had already entered the city: smallpox. Carried by the Spaniards, the disease ravaged the Aztec population, killing thousands, including their new emperor, too. The tides of war were turning. In May Ichen Wubait Arshai, Hernán Cortés launched the final assault on Tenochtitlan. With newly built brigantine ships deployed on Lake Texcoco, he cut off supplies and attacked the city from the water. On land, 3 separate armies approached from the north, south, and west, choking the city like a tightening noose. Tenochtitlan, once magnificent, became a war zone. Aztec warriors, led now by the young and fierce Cuauhtémoc, resisted fiercely. Every street became a battlefield. Canals turned red with blood. The Spanish ships bombarded the city from the lake, sinking enemy canoes and destroying bridges. Daily, the Spanish and their allies advanced block by block, capturing and burning temples, homes, and marketplaces. Aztec civilians endured famine, thirst, and disease. Yet still, they refused to surrender. Their love for their city and gods fueled a desperate resistance. But the siege had only just begun, and the cost would be horrific for all. After 3 brutal months of siege, Tenochtitlan could no longer stand. Cuauhtémoc, defiant to the last, tried to escape the city in a canoe with a handful of loyal warriors. But Spanish ships intercepted him. He was brought before Cortés, wounded and solemn. "Take my dagger," Cuauhtémoc is said to have told Cortés, "and end my life now." But Cortés refused. He saw value in parading the fallen emperor. The war was over. On August Shursan, Ichen Wubait Arshai, the once proud city of Tenochtitlan lay in ruins. Temples burned, corpses littered the streets, and the canals that once shimmered with life now choked with ash and blood. Cortés entered the broken capital not with a king's procession, but through smoldering rubble. His triumph was total, but his soul haunted. The Spanish flag replaced the Aztec banner. A new era began, one of conquest, colonization, and cultural transformation. The eagle had fallen, and a new empire would rise from its ashes. After the fall of Tenochtitlan, Silence settled over the city like a death shroud. What had once been the most powerful and beautiful metropolis in the Americas now lay in smoldering ruins. The temples were broken, the palaces collapsed, and the great marketplaces turned into empty courtyards strewn with bodies. Survivors wandered in shock. Children cried for parents who would never return. The sacred flames had been extinguished. No songs were sung, no festivals celebrated. The Aztec world had ended. Cortés ordered his men to begin the demolition of what remained. On top of temples, churches would rise. The canals would be filled in, roads laid over them. A new city, Spanish in design and Christian in soul, would be built on the bones of the old Mexico City. Cuauhtémoc, now a prisoner, was paraded through the ruins. Though defeated, he refused to bow. His pride became a symbol for the few who still remembered the grandeur of their empire. The conquest was over. The transformation had begun. In the shadows of Conquest stood Malintzin, also known as Malinche. She had been born a noblewoman, sold into slavery, and given to the Spaniards. But she became much more. As Cortés's translator, advisor, and confidant, she shaped the course of history. Malintzin spoke Nahuatl and Mayan fluently and quickly learned Spanish. She interpreted not just language, but culture and strategy. Her voice carried messages that forged alliances, calmed suspicions, and opened doors. Without her, Cortés would have stumbled blindly into cultural traps and misunderstandings. But Malintzin was more than a tool. She was a woman navigating survival in a world of war. Some saw her as a traitor. Others viewed her as a bridge between two civilizations. She bore Cortés a son, Martín, often considered one of the first mestizos, a symbol of a new world born from both conquest and union. In many ways, her legacy is the most complicated of all. Revered, reviled, misunderstood, Malintzin stood between empires and changed both. Even in victory, Cortés faced danger. The newly conquered lands were fragile, and tensions rose among his own men and allies. Rumors of rebellion brewed, and Cortés suspected Cuauhtémoc of plotting a counterattack. Despite no clear evidence, Cortés ordered the torture of the young emperor and his noble allies. Their feet were burned over coals as they were questioned about hidden gold and hidden armies. Cuauhtémoc remained silent through the agony, refusing to betray his people's honor even in defeat. Many Spaniards were shocked. Even some begged Cortés to stop. Yet the conqueror, paranoid and burdened with responsibility, pressed on. He feared a spark of resistance could reignite the entire flame. This moment cast a shadow over Cortés's legacy. Where once he had admired Cuauhtémoc's bravery, he now feared it. Power, once seized, is hard to hold without cruelty. The empire had fallen, but trust had not yet taken its place. With the Aztec Empire vanquished, the Spanish turned toward reshaping the land. Missionaries arrived with crosses and scriptures, eager to baptize and convert. Spanish settlers laid out plazas, cathedrals, and government houses where pyramids once stood. Indigenous nobles were forced to swear allegiance to the Spanish crown. The encomienda system granted vast tracts of land to Spanish conquerors. Along with the right to demand labor from native communities. Resistance was met with punishment, compliance with survival. But even within this transformation, indigenous voices found ways to survive. Traditions were hidden beneath Christian rituals. Nahuatl words slipped into Spanish speech. Art, weaving, and music carried the memory of lost gods and sacred mountains. The old world had not vanished. It had gone underground. The Spanish now ruled a land they called New Spain. But they did so atop a foundation of blood, loss, and cultural collision. Though the Spanish had claimed victory, resistance never truly died. Across the former empire, small rebellions erupted. Indigenous groups who had once allied with the Spaniards now felt betrayed, their lands taken, and voices ignored. Guerrilla bands formed in remote regions. Messengers traveled by night, keeping alive the hope of rising again. Some communities preserved old Aztec rites in secret, blending them with Christian festivals to avoid detection. Cuauhtémoc, even in captivity, remained a symbol. His bravery inspired whispers of rebellion and pride in what had been lost. Meanwhile, the Spanish realized that conquest was only the beginning. To truly control this new land, they would have to pacify, educate, indoctrinate, and prepare for future uprisings. The fall of an empire had ignited a different war, not for land, but for memory. Cuauhtémoc remained a prisoner, but his spirit was never broken. In Itzen Wubait Arsawur, Cortés led an expedition south, seeking mythical lands of gold, rumored to lie in the Honduran jungles. Cuauhtémoc was forced to accompany him, along with several other Aztec nobles. The journey was perilous. Raging rivers, disease, hostile tribes, and thick jungles challenged the Spanish forces. Throughout the journey, Cortés grew increasingly paranoid. He believed that Cuauhtémoc and the other nobles were conspiring to murder him and ignite a rebellion. Without trial, Cortés ordered Cuauhtémoc's execution at a remote camp beneath the trees. The young emperor was hanged. His last words, according to some accounts, were a call for dignity in death and loyalty to his people. With his death, the last ember of Aztec sovereignty was extinguished, but his legend only grew. For many, Cuauhtémoc became the face of indigenous resistance and undying pride. With the death of Cuauhtémoc, Hernán Cortés returned to central Mexico and began building his legacy. The ruins of Tenochtitlan were cleared, and in their place rose Mexico City, the capital of New Spain. Stones from Aztec temples were used to build cathedrals. The Spanish crown appointed Cortés as governor and captain general, granting him immense power. Yet this power came with enemies, both in Mexico and in Spain. Cortés instituted laws, minted currency, and oversaw land grants to his most loyal men. Churches multiplied, schools opened, and European customs were introduced. But beneath the surface, exploitation festered. Native peoples toiled under brutal systems like the encomienda, and epidemic diseases continued to ravage the population. The city grew fast, but not peacefully. The old world had been replaced, but the wounds were fresh. Beneath the sound of church bells, echoes of drums could still be heard in the night. As New Spain expanded, the Spanish crown moved to assert direct control. King Charles V began sending officials, bishops, and judges to ensure that the colony served royal interests, not just Cortés's. Cortés, once the hero of conquest, now found himself marginalized. Accused of mismanagement and greed, he traveled back to Spain to defend his name. There he was received coldly, admired for his achievements, but distrusted for his ambition. In his absence, viceroys were installed to manage the colony. Bureaucracy replaced battlefield bravery. The conquest had ended, and administration had begun. Spanish society blossomed in the New World. Wealthy settlers, noble titles, and imported culture. But for the indigenous population, the reality was grim: displacement, forced labor, religious repression, and loss of identity. Spain's grip tightened. What had begun as an adventure now hardened into empire. Hernán Cortés, once the feared and revered conqueror of Mexico, spent his final years in obscurity. Stripped of much of his power and denied royal rewards he believed he deserved, he lived between Spain and Mexico, a shadow of the man who brought down an empire. In Ichenwu Cortés died quietly near Seville. No grand ceremony marked his passing. Some said he died bitter, others claimed he found peace in old age. Regardless, his legacy was already cemented in both stone and sorrow. To the Spanish, he remained a symbol of daring conquest. To the indigenous peoples of Mesoamerica, he was a destroyer of worlds. Even after his death, his body was moved, hidden, and reburied many times. It seemed that not even in death could Cortés find rest. History remembers him not just for what he did, but for what was lost in the doing. Though the empire had fallen, survivors ensured that the story lived on. Aztec scribes, nobles, and priests adapted to the new order, learning Spanish and the Latin alphabet to record their history before it could be erased. Texts like the Florentine Codex were born from this effort. Books filled with memories, rituals, and stories told by indigenous voices. These documents preserved what the swords tried to silence. Others created oral traditions, passed down through generations, in Nahuatl whispers and secret ceremonies. Resistance took the form of memory, survival, and language. Women told their children of cities that once floated on lakes. Elders described gods of fire, wind, and maize. Songs told of the day the eagle fell, but promised it would one day rise again. History, even conquered, still breathed. The Aztecs had once measured time through elaborate cycles and rituals, marking seasons, divine prophecies, and festivals with precision. Their Tonalpohualli and Xiupohualli calendars were sacred tools, dictating when to plant, fight, or worship. But with conquest came disorientation. The old festivals were outlawed, the priests silenced, and the sacred calendar forgotten by force. Christian festivals like Easter and Christmas replaced celebrations like Tlalcaxipehualistli and Panquetzalistli. Temples were destroyed, and with them the rhythm of Aztec life. Yet not all was lost. In secret, many communities continued to track time by the moon and stars, keeping records in codices hidden from Spanish eyes. Farmers still honored the gods of rain and maize, with whispered prayers under crosses. The Aztec world had been broken, but it had not vanished. The calendar still ticked in quiet corners, reminding the people of who they had been. Time, it seemed, could be conquered, but not entirely erased. Gold had drawn the Spaniards to the New World, but it was God who claimed the lasting victory. As soldiers returned home, missionaries arrived in waves. Franciscans, Dominicans, and Jesuits spread across the former Aztec lands with Bibles in hand. They destroyed idols, burned codices, and converted temples into churches. Indigenous people were baptized by the thousands, often in mass ceremonies. The Spanish believed they were saving souls, but to the native peoples, it often felt like the final conquest of identity. Still, some friars sought understanding. Fray Bernardino de Sahagún, a Franciscan friar, worked with Aztec elders to record their language, beliefs, and history. His Florentine Codex would become a priceless record of a lost world. Conversion, like conquest, was not simple. While many outwardly accepted the new faith, ancient gods lived on behind the faces of saints. Old rituals cloaked themselves in Christian language. A spiritual war had replaced the military one, and it was just as fierce with the Aztec temples gone and oral traditions endangered. Written memory became a battleground. A few brave scribes and friars began compiling codices, pictorial manuscripts that recorded pre-Hispanic myths, histories, rituals, and daily life. Some of these were created in collaboration with native artists and scholars, using European paper and ink, but preserving Aztec visual style. The Codex Mendoza, Codex Bourbonicus, and the Florentine Codex offered snapshots of the world that had been. Each image of warriors in jaguar pelts, farmers sowing maize, priests raising offerings, was an act of resistance. Through brush and ink, the memory of the empire survived. But not all codices made it. Many were destroyed by zealous priests who saw them as demonic. Others were stolen and shipped to Europe, lost in royal archives. What remains today is only a fragment, but it's enough to speak across centuries. The Aztecs had no alphabet, but their symbols endure, and they still tell stories. Tenochtitlan had once pulsed with sacred ritual. At the heart of the city stood the Templo Mayor, where gods like Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc were honored with music and sacrifice. Now silence reigned. The temple had been torn down, and in its place stood a Catholic cathedral, where priests once chanted in Nahuatl, now hymns echoed in Latin. Yet beneath the cathedral's foundations, fragments of the past remained buried, literally and spiritually. Some believed the gods had retreated into the earth, waiting for the day they would rise again. Others came at night to whisper prayers to stones once sacred. The old religion, though outlawed, lingered like incense in the cracks. Archaeological memory would one day uncover these ruins. But for the survivors, memory alone had to suffice. The temples were silent, but they were not forgotten. From the ashes of conquest rose a new generation, mestizos, children of both Spanish and indigenous descent. They were the living embodiment of cultural collision, and their lives reflected both pain and promise. Many, like Martin Cortés, the son of Hernán Cortés and Malintzin, were born into power yet caught between identities. Rejected by some Spaniards and distrusted by native communities, mestizos became a new class entirely, neither conquerors nor conquered. They learned both Spanish and Nahuatl. They walked in cathedrals built over temples. Their art blended European oil painting with native iconography. They danced to drums beneath crosses. Over time, mestizos would come to define the cultural fabric of New Spain, and eventually, Mexico itself. Their story was not one of simple triumph, but of survival, adaptation, and new beginnings. In them, the empire lived on, not as it was, but as it had become. In the decades following the conquest, memory itself became a battleground. The Spanish chroniclers, eager to justify the conquest, painted the Aztecs as bloodthirsty pagans. They wrote of cannibalism, tyranny, and demonic gods. In their words, the fall of Tenochtitlan became divine justice. But native writers had their own stories to tell. Educated in Spanish schools, yet deeply rooted in their culture, indigenous chroniclers like Fernando Alva Ixtlilxochitl and Domingo de San, Anton Muñoz Chimalpahin, preserved pre-Hispanic lore and corrected European exaggerations. Their works revealed the complexities of Aztec civilization, its science, law, poetry, and diplomacy. The struggle between these two narratives, one of conquest, the other of resilience, shaped how the world would come to understand the fall of the Aztecs. Even today, historians still debate, was this the end of an empire, or the beginning of a resistance that never died? In the far reaches of the jungle, far from Mexico City's growing sprawl, stories were told of a jaguar who walked between worlds. He was not a beast of flesh, but a spirit, one who carried the memory of lost cities and fallen kings. Among the Maya, Mixtec, and even distant Andean tribes, whispers of the Aztec downfall reached far and wide, and with them came myths. The jaguar became a symbol, not of war, but of survival. He prowled the forests where the Spanish dared not go, guarding ancient secrets. Children were told, "As long as the Jaga walks, our gods are not dead." Some claimed to see him in dreams. Others carved his image into hidden altars. Though the empire was gone, its spirit had taken new shape. The jaguar was no longer a warrior of conquest, but a guardian of memory. Among the pages of the Florentine Codex, compiled over decades by Fray Bernardino de Sahagún and Nahua scholars, voices from a shattered world spoke. This monumental work, stirra volumes rich with illustrations and native accounts, was more than a book. It was a lifeline. Within it were stories of the gods, daily rituals, clothing, farming, childbirth, war, and medicine. Most striking were the first-hand accounts of the conquest. Aztec survivors, interviewed by Sahagún's team, described the horror of the Spanish arrival, the flash of steel, the thunder of cannons, the betrayal of Moctezuma, and the destruction of temples. They also described the bravery of warriors and the dignity of Cuauhtémoc. It was a rare moment where conqueror and conquered collaborated to preserve a dying world. The Florentine Codex became the most detailed native account of the fall and ensured that the Aztecs would not vanish in silence. Though buried beneath Mexico City, the memory of Tenochtitlan never disappeared. Locals still referred to old neighborhoods by their Nahuatl names. Some streets followed the lines of ancient canals. During festivals, dancers performed in costumes, echoing the jaguar and eagle warriors. Over time, Tenochtitlan became a symbol not just of the past, but of pride. Poets wrote of the lake that once sparkled, of the floating gardens, and of the lost city's splendor. Even Spanish-born criollos began to speak of the Aztecs with awe. They romanticized Moctezuma and Cuauhtémoc, not as savages, but as noble kings. This reimagining helped forge a Mexican identity that embraced both conquest and resistance. The fall of Tenochtitlan became a national myth, tragic, heroic, and deeply human. A city lost but never forgotten. Though the Spanish conquest ended the political rule of the Aztecs, the empire lives on in ways no sword could destroy. In the Nahuatl language, still spoken by over 1 million people, in maize, chocolate, and chili peppers eaten across the world, in temples rediscovered by archaeologists, rising once more into daylight, in the faces of the people who walk the streets of Mexico, carrying the bloodlines of warriors, farmers, and poets. Today, the story of the Aztecs is taught in schools and honored in museums. Cuauhtémoc is a national hero. Malintzin is re-examined with nuance. Moctezuma's palace lies beneath the city, but his name still echoes. The empire may have fallen in stone and fire, but it rose again in spirit. This is not just a history of conquest. It's the story of how identity endures, and in that story, the Aztec heart still beats. The lust for gold was the fire that fueled the conquest. Cortés and his men had chased it across mountains, rivers, and cities. But for many, that greed led only to ruin. Within decades, much of the Aztec gold was melted down and shipped to Spain, losing all artistic and sacred meaning. Temples were looted, and ancestral treasures vanished. Some ships sank in storms, lost to the sea forever. Stories spread among survivors, Spanish and native alike, of cursed treasure. Men who hoarded gold suffered strange deaths. Fortunes were built on blood, and many questioned whether it had been worth the cost. Even Cortés lamented in his writings how gold creates endless suffering. The Aztecs had once viewed it as the excrement of the gods, precious but dangerous when worshipped. In the end, the gold brought power, but not peace. Archaeologists uncovered the remains of the Templo Mayor, shattered yet defiant. Carvings of serpents, skulls, and gods emerged from the soil. Offerings of jade, obsidian, and sacrificed animals told stories once thought lost. The Mexican government embraced the rediscovery. Museums rose beside ancient walls. Tourists and citizens alike came to witness a heritage reborn. Yet for many, the stones were more than history. They were memory, proof that the empire still had a voice. And every time the earth is broken in the city, there's a chance the past may speak again. In the grand narrative of conquest, the voices of women are often quiet, but their impact was immense. Malintzin, the interpreter and bridge between worlds, shaped history with her words. Tecuelhuetzin, noblewomen of Tenochtitlan, negotiated for peace during sieges. Countless mothers, priestesses, healers, and farmers held society together even as the empire collapsed. After the conquest, indigenous women bore the burden of change. Many were forced into marriage with Spanish settlers. Others became keepers of culture, hiding sacred knowledge in lullabies, recipes, and stories told around the fire. Women adapted, resisted, and survived. Through them, languages were preserved, customs endured, and a people lived on. Though unnamed in many chronicles, they were the quiet architects of cultural survival. Centuries after his death, Hernán Cortés remains one of the most controversial figures in history. Some see him as a visionary explorer who forged a new world. Others call him a brutal invader who destroyed a civilization. In Mexico, his legacy is deeply contested. His statues have been defaced, moved, or hidden. Schools debate how to teach his story. Streets once named for him have been renamed to honor indigenous leaders. Yet the shadow he cast cannot be ignored. Without Cortés, there would be no New Spain, no mestizo identity, no Mexico as we know it. He is not a hero or a villain. He is a force, a man who changed the course of continents. And like all forces of history, his memory is something a nation must continue to wrestle with. Still, the people refuse to forget. Nahuatl was sung in lullabies, whispered in prayers, and carved into hidden altars. It endured in recipes, poetry, and names like Xochitl and Citlali. Today, Nahuatl survives. Spoken by over 1 million people, it carries echoes of ancient emperors and marketplace vendors alike. The language of the Aztecs still lives. In voice, breath, and memory, though he died young and in chains, Cuauhtémoc, the last Aztec emperor, became immortal in legend. His courage, defiance, and loyalty made him a symbol of resistance that transcended time. In the Xujolth and Ursus centuries, as Mexico fought for independence from Spain and later forged a national identity, Cuauhtémoc was reborn in murals, monuments, and schoolbooks. He was no longer just a fallen king. He was the spirit of a people. Poets wrote verses in his name. Revolutionaries invoked his bravery. His image appeared on coins and sculptures, often shown standing proud, never kneeling. For modern Mexicans, Cuauhtémoc became what Cortés could never be, a symbol of unity and honor. His blood had once soaked the soil of conquest. Now it flowed through the heartbeat of Aztec. In recent decades, new archaeological discoveries have revealed just how much of the Aztec world remains buried, waiting to be rediscovered. Temples once thought lost have emerged beneath houses, roads, and markets. In the heart of Mexico City, entire neighborhoods have been excavated to reveal ancient plazas and sacred precincts. Every relic uncovered, a carved serpent, a ceremonial mask, a burial chamber, adds another piece to the story. Scientists collaborate with indigenous communities, historians, and artists to bring the past into the present. Tourists visit these sites, but for descendants of the Aztecs, they are more than attractions. They are proof of survival. The temples are no longer silent. They speak again in stone and soil, and their voice is strong across Mexico and beyond. Festivals, traditions, and daily life still carry echoes of the Aztecs. From the Day of the Dead altars filled with marigolds and offerings, to corn-based foods like tamales and tortillas, Aztec culture lives not in ruins, but in the rhythm of everyday life. Traditional dancers wear eagle feathers, musicians revive ancient instruments, and Nahuatl phrases pepper modern Spanish. The people remember, not just in ceremony, but in spirit. In schools, students study the fall of Tenochtitlan, not as a distant tragedy, but as the birth of their resilience. In the markets, grandmothers share recipes passed down for centuries. In homes, families tell the story of their ancestors with pride. What was meant to be erased has been reborn in 1,000 ways. The people are not gone. They are still here, dancing, speaking, surviving. The Aztec prophecy spoke of an eagle perched on a cactus, devouring a serpent, the sign of where their great city should be built. Tenochtitlan rose from that vision. Today, that same symbol adorns the flag of Mexico. It's more than just a crest. It is the essence of a nation forged from fire and water, conquest and courage. The eagle represents strength, the serpent wisdom, and the cactus endurance. Every time the flag waves, it tells the story of what was lost and what was reclaimed. This symbol, born from Aztec prophecy and redefined through struggle, now belongs to an entire country. A reminder that even in the fall of empires, something eternal can rise. The fall of the Aztec Empire was not the end. It was a transformation. Stone by stone, word by word, life moved forward. The pain of conquest forged a new identity, a culture that blends old gods with new faiths, ancient languages with modern tongues, sorrow with pride. From the ashes of temples rose churches. From the silence of the defeated came the songs of the living. From the blood spilled, a new people emerged, resilient, diverse, and deeply rooted. The story of the Aztecs lives on in the rhythms of Mexico, in the faces of its people, in the soul of the land. Empires may fall, but identity endures, and through memory, tradition, and love of history, the Aztec heart still beats. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey through the rise, fall, and legacy of the Aztec Empire. From the mighty temples of Tenochtitlan to the stormy nights of conquest, we've walked with emperors, warriors, priests, and poets. But this isn't just a story about the past. It's a story that lives on today, in every Nahuatl word spoken, every child learning their heritage, every festival echoing ancient customs. The Aztec spirit still thrives. History is more than dates and ruins. It's memory, identity, and the voice of those who came before us. Through their courage and resilience, we learn the true meaning of survival. If this journey moved you, inspired you, or taught you something new, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring history to life, one story at a time. And remember, the fall of an empire is never the end. It's the beginning of something new. Until next time, thank you for watching. Stay curious, stay inspired, and keep seeking the forgotten stories that shape our world